In this video, we'll study about the membranous labyrinth. So in this picture, whichever is colored in blue is the membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth consists of closed system of intercommunicating membranous sacs and ducts within the bony labyrinth. So these are the bony labyrinths. Within the bony labyrinth, you have the membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth presents the cochlear duct. So this is a cochlear duct within the bony cochlea. Then you have the saccule and utricle within the vestibule, and then you have the three semicircular duct within the corresponding bony canals. And these membranous labyrinth are filled with endolymph. The semicircular ducts open into the utricle, which joins with the saccule by a Y-shaped utriculo-saccular duct, and the saccule in turn communicates in front with the cochlear duct through the ductus reunions. So this is called as the ductus reunions. The utricle and the saccule and the semicircular ducts are suspended from the bony labyrinth by fibrocellular bands across the perilymphatic space. The membranous labyrinth possesses two separate functional components: the cochlear duct for hearing, that is the auditory system, and the saccule and the utricle along with the semicircular duct for balancing, that is the vestibular or labyrinthine system. The saccule and the utricle monitor the static equilibrium and the linear acceleration, whereas the semicircular ducts are concerned with the kinetic equilibrium and the angular acceleration. Obviously, the heterogeneous function of the membranous labyrinth are associated with the regional structural variation and separate nerve connection. Now we'll see about the cochlear duct or scala media. The duct lies along the outer wall of the bony cochlear canal and undergoes a spiral course of 2 3/4 turns. It blindly begins at the cupula and the blind ends is known as the lagina. The basal turn of the duct enters the vestibule, where it joins with the saccule by a narrow duct that is known as the ductus reunions. The cochlear duct contains the spiral organ of Corte, that is the peripheral organ of hearing, which rests on the basilar membrane and covered by the membrana tectoria. Next we'll see about the structure of the cochlear duct. So this is the cochlear duct. The cochlear duct is bounded medially by the vestibular membrane. So this is the vestibular membrane which bounds medially. This vestibular membrane is also known as the Reissner's membrane, and it is bounded laterally by the stria vascularis. So this is the stria vascularis, and below by the tympanic lip of the osseous spiral lamina in the medial part and the basilar membrane in the lateral part. The basilar membrane is subdivided into a lateral part which is known as the zona pectinata and the medial part which is known as the zona arcuata, upon which the organ of Corte rests. The vestibular membrane is made up of an outer layer of flattened epithelial perilymphatic cells and an intervening basal lamina and an inner endolymphatic surface which is lined by a layer of simple squamous epithelium. The stria vascularis consists of specialized stratified epithelium which is permeated with rich plexus of intraepithelial capillaries. The epithelium is composed of three types of cells: an inner, dark or chromophil cells, and intermediate light or chromophobe cells and outer basal cells. The stria vascularis is the chief source of the synthesis of endolymph, which is closely resembles the intracellular fluid with high potassium and low sodium ion concentration. The positive electrical potential of the endolymph is largely dependent upon the oxygenation level of the epithelial cells. The projecting free edge of the osseous spiral lamina splits into a tympanic lip and a vestibular lip separated by a C-shaped sulcus that is known as the sulcus spiralis internus. The tympanic lip is perforated by numerous foramina for the passage of the branches of the cochlear nerve. The tractus spiralis foraminosus at the base of the modulus at the bottom of the internal acoustic meatus, they transmits the branches of the cochlear nerve. The branches of the cochlear nerve pass through the canal of the modulus and they bend successfully outward to reach the attached margin of the osseous lamina, where the spiral canal enlarges and lodges the bipolar spiral ganglion cells. The basilar membrane stretches from the tympanic lip of the osseous lamina to the crista basilaris, which is a conical projection from the outer wall of the cochlear canal. The upper surface of the vestibular lip presents a number of surface elevation that is known as the auditory teeth, which are separated by furrows intersected at right angles. The vestibular lip gives attachment to the membrana tectoria at the tip, and the vestibular membrane is somewhat attached away from the tip. Next we'll see about the spiral organ of Corti. It consists of inner and outer rod cells or pillar cells. Then you have inner and outer hair cells. And then you have the supporting Dieter cells. And then you have the Hensen cells. And then the membrana tectoria. The inner and the outer rod cells are each arranged in a single row attached to the basilar membrane by their expanded bases. Their upper end incline and meet each other separated by a triangular interval that is known as the tunnel of Corti. The inner rods are about 6,000 in number and make an angle of about 60 degrees with the basilar membrane. The outer rods are about 4,000 in number and make an angle of about 40 degrees with the basilar membrane. The inner hair cells are pyriform in shape and they are type 1 sensory cells and they are about 3,500 in number and they are arranged in a single row on the medial side of the inner rod cells. About 40 to 60 stereocilia or microvilli project upward from the free surface of each inner hair cells and the stereocilia are arranged in a U-shaped manner with the concavity directed towards the modulus. The base of the inner hair cell is provided with two types of synaptic boutons. This is the schematic picture to show the inner hair cells. So they are pyriform shape and then you have 40 to 60 stereocilia or microvilli. And when you see the arrangement, it is arranged in a U-shaped manner with the concavity directed towards the modulus. and the base of the inner hair cell presents two types of synaptic boutons. The afferent fiber of the cochlear nerve comes in direct synaptic contact with the plasma membrane of the hair cells. The terminal boutons of the efferent fiber of the cochlear nerve make synaptic contact only with the lateral aspect of the afferent fibers, and they do not reach the hair cells directly. This suggests that the efferent fibers, they modulate the transmission of the afferent fibers. Apart from the synaptic boutons, the inner hair cells are surrounded by the inner phalangeal supporting cells. Next we'll see about the outer hair cells. The outer hair cells are elongated, cylindrical in shape, and they are type 2 sensory cells, and they are about 12,000 to 20,000 in numbers, and they are arranged in 3 rows in the basal coil, 4 rows in the middle coil, and 5 rows in the apical coil. In total, there are about 23,500 hair cells in the spiral organ of cortex, and approximately an equal number of neurons in the cochlear nerve in man. This is a schematic picture of outer hair cells. So these hair cells presents 80 to 100 stereocilia, and they are arranged in each cell in an U-shaped or W-shaped manner with the concavity directed towards the modulus. The auditory hair cells presents no kinocilium, but it has a centriole and a basal body on the convex side of the U or W. When the stereocilia is compressed towards the centrioles, the sensory hair cells are stimulated. The plasma membrane of the base of the outer hair cells receives directly the synaptic boutons of both afferent and efferent fibers of the cochlear nerve. This suggests that the efferent fibers by inhibitory influence alter the threshold of the excitability of the outer hair cells. Next we'll see about the supporting cells of Dieter. This intervenes between the rows of the outer hair cells, and they are fixed by their bases to the basilar membrane, and they form a cap-like investment around the bases of the hair cells and extends as the phalangeal processes between the hair cells and to form the reticular lamina. The reticular lamina is a delicate membrane by tight junctions of the edges of several phalangeal processes, and they extend from the heads of the outer rod cells to the external row of outer hair cells. The reticular lamina presents a circular holes for the free ends of the outer hair cells. Beneath the reticular lamina, the upper 2/3 of the outer hair cells are separated from the Dieter cells by a cleft of space which are intercommunicating, and these are filled with the fluid that is known as the corti lymph. Then we'll see about the supporting cells of the Hensen's. The Hensen's cells are elongated columnar cells, and they lie outside the external row of outer hair cells in 5 or 6 rows, and they are succeeded more externally by the cubical cells of the Claudius. The cubical cells of the Claudius becomes continuous with the cells that lines the sulcus spiralis externus. Besides the tunnel of the cortei, so this is the tunnel of the cortei, that is the inner tunnel. The spiral organ possesses an outer tunnel between the outer hair cells and the Hensen cells. So this is the outer tunnel. There is another space that is known as the space of Newell, which is present between the outer rod cells and the innermost row of outer hair cells. These spaces within the spiral organ communicate with one another and they are filled with corti lymph. The corti lymph resembles the perilymph and not the endolymph. It has a high sodium and low potassium ion concentration. The ionic composition of the corti lymph is maintained by the basilar membrane, which acts as a sieve for the ion and to pass from the perilymph to the scala tympani. On the other hand, the reticular membrane acts as an ionic barrier, preventing the exchange between the endolymph and the corti lymph. The high sodium and low potassium ion concentration of the corti lymph form a normal ionic environment for the excitable hair cells. Next we'll see about the membrana tectoria. It is an acellular protein-rich fibrillated gelatinous structure similar to the epidermal keratin. It is attached to the vestibular lip of the osseous lamina and covers the stereocilia of the inner and outer hair cells. The Hardesty membrane is a specialized area on its undersurface and it is where the tips of the stereocilia of the outer hair cells are embedded. The Hensen stripe is another area on its undersurface where the tips of the stereocilia of the inner hair cells are embedded. The peripheral fibers of the cochlear nerve ramify around the bases of the inner and the outer hair cells. The nerve fibers enter the modulus after passing through the two tables of the osseous spiral lamina. Within the modulus, each fiber ends as the peripheral process of the bipolar spiral ganglion cells. The central process of the bipolar ganglion cell passes through the tractus spiralis foraminosus at the bottom of the internal acoustic meatus and they unite to form the cochlear nerve. It is estimated that 10 spiral ganglion are connected to each inner hair cell, whereas each ganglion cell is connected to more than 10 outer hair cells. The inner hair cells are analogous with the cones of the retina and they are responsible for fine discrimination of sound waves, while the outer hair cells are more involved in the detection of near threshold events. The spiral organ in the basal turn of the cochlea is concerned with the high pitch sound and that in the apical turn with the low pitch sound. The spiral organ of cortei has no blood vessels of its own and its oxygen supply comes from corti lymph. In short period of diminished oxygen supply, the enzymes of the corti lymph provide energy which are needed by the organ of cortei by anaerobic glycolysis. Persistent exposure to excessive loud sounds causes a degenerative changes in the organ of cortei at the base of the cochlea. This results in high tone deafness which is encountered most frequently among the workers in the boiler factories. Hence, it is known as the boiler maker disease. Next we'll see about the saccule and the utricle. So both saccule and utricle are confined with the bony vestibule, and each of them possess a specialized sense organ, the macula, which regulates the static equilibrium and the linear acceleration by the gravity receptors of the sensitive hair cells. The saccule is a globular membranous sac, and it is situated in the spherical recess of the vestibule. The saccule communicates in front with the cochlear duct by means of the ductus reunions, and it is connected behind with the utricle by a Y-shaped utriculo-saccular duct which forms a blind saccus endolymphaticus beneath the dura mater after passing through the aqueduct of the vestibule. The endolymph is absorbed by the epithelial cells lining the saccus. The macula is about 2 mm by 3 mm in size, and it is situated in the medial wall of the saccule, and it is innervated by the lower division of the vestibular nerve. The utricle is oblong in shape and situated above and behind the saccule in the elliptical recess, and posteriorly and above the utricle receives the 3 semicircular ducts by 5 orifices. The macula of the utricle is situated along the floor and the anterior wall, and it is innervated by the upper division of the vestibular nerve. Now we'll see about the structure of the macula. Basically, the wall of the vestibular component of the membranous labyrinth consists of 3 layers: an outer layer of perilymphatic cells, a middle layer of tunica propria, and inner layer of single row of epithelial cells. At the macula, the inner layer presents the hair cells, supporting cells, and then it is covered by a plaque of gelatinous mass that is known as the otolithic membrane, which is impregnated with the calcium crystals, the calcite. The stereocilium and the kinocilium, they project into the otolithic membrane. The hair cells or sensory cells, each is provided with free surface with 70 to 80 stereocilia and 1 kinocilium. The stereocilia are modified microvilli. The kinocilium is a modified cilia. At one end of the cell lies a long kinocilium, and the stereocilia are arranged as a decreasing order of length, lie in a row away from the kinocilium. This orientation produces a morphological polarization. When the stereocilia deviates towards the kinocilium, the hair cells tend to depolarize or excitation. When they deviate in an opposite direction, the hair cells is hyperpolarized or inhibited. The location of the kinocilia at the surface of each hair cell differ in the maculae of the saccule and the utricle with respect to the parting line, which is drawn through the central region of the macula. In the saccule, the kinocilia are directed away from the parting line, whereas in the utricle they are directed towards the parting line. According to the shape and the nature of the innervation, the hair cells presents 2 types. One is the type 1 hair cells, the other one is the type 2 hair cells. The type 1 hair cells are flask shaped with a round base, and they are enclosed by the afferent nerve endings. The vestibular efferent fibers, they make synapse with the afferent nerve endings, and thereby they regulate the transmission signals by inhibition. The type 2 hair cells are elongated, columnar, and you have the several afferent and efferent synaptic mountains which make direct contact with the hair cells. Thus, the inhibitory efferent fibers, they regulate directly the threshold of the excitation of the hair cells. The supporting cells or elongated columnar, they rest on the basal lamina and they present microvilli at the free surface projecting into the otolithic membrane. Next we'll see about the functions of the saccule and the utricle. When the otolithic membrane with the calcium crystals faces downward by the movement of the head, it exerts a gravitational pull on the sensitive hair cells and gives the information of the position of the head with respect to the body. The saccule is stimulated during the lateral tilting of the head on the same side. The utricle is stimulated when the head is bent either forward or backward. The utricle and possibly the saccule respond to the linear acceleration during the movement of the head in a straight line, that is forward and backward or up and down. Next we'll see about the semicircular ducts. The three semicircular ducts are contained within the corresponding bony canals, and each duct passes along the outer wall of the canal, and it is about 1/4 of the diameter of the bony canal. And within the ampulla, the duct dilates and they present the crista ampullaris, which project into the interior of the duct. The semicircular duct open into the utricle by 5 openings. Now we'll see about the structure of the crista ampullaris. The epithelial cells of the ampulla consist of the sensory hair cells. Then you have the columnar supporting cells covered by a cone-shaped gelatinous mass, the cupula, into which the stereocilia and the kinocilia of the hair cells project. The bases of the hair cells are innervated by the vestibular nerve. The types of the hair cells and the orientation of the stereocilia and the kinocilia are similar to those of the macula. In the ampulla of the lateral semicircular duct, the kinocilia of the hair cells are directed towards the utricle, whereas in the ampullae of the anterior and the posterior ducts, they are directed away from the utricle. So next we'll see about the functions of the semicircular ducts. The cupula of the crista ampullaris acts like a swing door and it is deflected to one side by the movements of the endolymph. It acts as a rotatory receptors and monitors the angular acceleration during the rotation of the head, and at the same time keeps the body posture upright. The compression of the stereocilia towards the kinocilium produces the excitation of the hair cells, and their decompression produces inhibition. Therefore, the lateral duct is stimulated when the cupula is deflected towards the utricle, whereas the vertical ducts, that is the anterior and the posterior, are stimulated when the cupulae are deflected away from the utricle. The stimulation of the hair cells of a particular canal depends upon the plane in which the rotation occurs. The canal is more efficiently stimulated by the rotation in its own diagonal plane. The rotatory movement of the head around a vertical axis stimulates the lateral semicircular duct. A clockwise rotation stimulates the right duct, and an anti-clockwise rotation stimulates the left duct. When a clockwise rotation starts, the inertia of the endolymph deflects the right cupula towards the utricle and the left cupula away from the utricle. Eventually, the right duct is stimulated and the left duct is inhibited. When the rotatory movement is continued with the same speed, the inertia of the endolymph is overcome and the cupullae regain their resting position. At the cessation of the movement, the momentum of the fluid causes the bending of the cupullae in opposite direction. That is why no sensation occurs during prolonged rotation, but a sensation of turning in opposite direction is felt when the rotation suddenly stops. Now we'll see about the applied anatomy related to the internal ear. First we'll see about the tinnitus, that is the ringing or roaring noises in the ear which are frequent sign of the peripheral cochlear disease which may be followed by deafness. Next is the vertigo. It is a feeling of giddiness involving the subjective sense of rotation either of the surrounding or of the person. It is a cardinal sign of the labyrinthine dysfunction. Vertigo may occur in normal subject due to excessive stimulation of the semicircular duct, and it is associated with nystagmus because of the compensatory movement of extraocular muscle via the medial longitudinal fasciculus. Next we'll see about the motion sickness. The motion sickness is characterized by vertigo, headache, nausea and vomiting. It is primarily due to excessive stimulation of the utricle and the saccule. Deaf mutes who lacks the labyrinthine receptor do not experience motion sickness. Likewise, the infants do not get motion sickness since the labyrinth is not functioning during the first year of life. Next we'll see about the Meniere's disease, and it is characterized by paroxysmal attacks of vertigo, tinnitus and progressive impairment of hearing. It is generally attributed to disturbed fluid balance of the internal ear and distension of cochlear duct. The symptoms may be relieved by reducing the sodium intake, and intractable cases may be treated by surgical destruction of labyrinth. Next we'll see about the caloric test. This procedure has a distinct advantage of testing the pathway from each internal ear separately. The head is positioned so that the lateral semicircular duct is in a vertical plane and the external acoustic meatus is irrigated with warm or cold water. The ampulla of the duct is near the bone that is undergoing a change of temperature, and the endolymph rise or fall depending on whether it is warmed or cooled. This procedure causes a nystagmus with the intact vestibular pathway. The cool water in one ear produces the nystagmus of the opposite side, whereas the warm water produces the nystagmus of the same side. This is remembered by the mnemonic cows. Cold water, opposite side nystagmus. Warm water, same side nystagmus. Absence of reaction to the irrigation signifies the complete interruption of the function of the vestibular nerve.